Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's joint event by VIDC and DRC on Afghanistan's peace process and recent development. I hope everyone joining us today from around the world is safe and healthy. My name is Ahmad, and I'm a doctorate researcher at the Department of Migration and Globalization at Danube-University, Krems. I have also consulted Vienna Institute for International Dialogue and Cooperation, VIDC, on topics related to Afghanistan since 2015. It is indeed a great honor to have some of the extremely knowledgeable panelists and speakers from Afghanistan today. And it has been a pleasure to have met them in person, Dr. Sima, Samar, Ms. Fawzia Koofi, and have worked closely with Bilal Sarwary years back in Afghanistan. I welcome Dr. Sima Samar, Ms. Fawzia Koofi, Bilal Sarwary, and Ms. Rahela Sediqi. Thank you very much for your time for attending today's discussion. Our moderator, Sana Safi, will introduce our speakers later. Just brief on the VIDC. The Vienna Institute for International Dialogue and Cooperation is a civil society organization based in Vienna, Austria. The Institute has a long history. It was founded in 1962 by the prominent Austrian politicians and the so-called Third World as a think tank organization for global development issues. Since 2015, VIDC has focused on the political development in Afghanistan. The Afghan community used to be a very small community in Austria, but since 2015, Afghan community has become the 10th largest migrant community in Austria, with tens of diaspora organizations. The Danish Refugee Council, DRC, the partner organization for today's event, and VIDC organized today's event together. I would like to take this opportunity and thank DRC for their good cooperation in organizing today's event. The panel discussion is part of the DRC's Diaspora program, Afghan Diaspora Engagement in Europe initiative, in cooperation with the Vienna Institute for International Dialogue and Cooperation. And the program is funded by GIZ from Germany and Austrian Development Agency. The project aims at supporting increased dialogue. The Diaspora program aims at supporting increased dialogue and agency within the Afghan diaspora in Europe, as well as between the Afghan diaspora and the Afghan government. This project will attempt to improve coordination, increase collaboration across organizations, and facilitate high level of engagement and influence for the Afghan diaspora in Europe. Finally, all the technical issues related to Zoom and technology. Thank you, Adrien, Hochawa Kuboda, Lisa Buksh, Obaidullah Abdul Haq, Adrien Bory, and Michael Fanizada. Before we start, a few technical reminders. The language of today's discussion is English, but we have simultaneous translation into Dari and Pashto languages for those who want to follow the discussion in Dari and Pashto other than English. To do that, please click the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and choose the language. Many thanks to our interpreters who will do the translation job, which is not an easy one. This event is live streamed on VIDC and DRC Facebook pages. Remember, the interpretation is only possible on the webinar, not on the Facebook live stream. On the Facebook, it's only English, but you can leave your questions there as well. Please write your questions in the Q&A section. You can leave your questions in Dari, Pashto, or English, and our colleagues will pass them on to the moderator of the discussion. And we'll try to ask as many of your questions as possible from the speakers. Now I would like to hand over the discussion to the moderator of the event, Sana Safi. Sana Safi is a senior presenter for the Delhi BBC News Pashto TV news program called BBC Nare Dawat. Thank you, Sana, for your support and for moderating today's event. I wish you all a productive and inspiring discussion. Thank you. Sana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Ali Ahmad. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We have a very expert panel for you, but before that, I want to mention the topic, which is, as you all know, the US says its forces will leave Afghanistan by 11 September 2021, after, or 20 years after it invaded the country and ousted the Taliban leadership. At least 2,500 US troops are part of the 9,600 strong NATO Afghan mission. US and NATO officials have said that the Taliban, a hardline Islamist movement, have so far failed to live up to commitments to reduce violence in Afghanistan. The slow pace of talks between the Afghan and the Taliban negotiators have so far, it suggests that it would be difficult for them to reach a power sharing arrangement or agreement before the US withdrawal is complete. So to talk about all of these issues and to unpack some of those bigger themes and the concerns and aspirations of the Afghans, we have a panel, an expert panel for you today. And particularly, we are going to be talking about what's going on in Doha in regards to the peace talks. What is the news from Afghanistan? How are ordinary Afghans reacting to what they've been hearing from Doha, Moscow, Istanbul, and Washington, DC, and other capitals from around the world? And finally, what is troop withdrawal in the absence of a peace negotiation or in the absence of a settlement, a political settlement, mean for Afghan women, minorities, and diaspora relations? To answer these questions, we have Fawzia Koofi today with us. She is a member of peace negotiation team representing the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. She was recently nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. After the Taliban regime, Fawzia continued to finish her law school, taking evening classes while working with UNICEF on women and children's rights. Our second panelist is Bilal Sarwary, who is an Afghan journalist based in Kabul. He's a former longtime producer and reporter for the BBC World Service. And he regularly appears on France 24, Radio New Zealand, Turkish radio and television, CNN, CBC, and Al Jazeera English. We also have Sima Samar, or we might be waiting for Dr. Samar, but I'm going to introduce her anyway in case she is able to join us. Dr. Samar is a renowned advocate of human rights and women's rights based in Afghanistan. She was appointed as the inaugural chair of the Afghanistan Human Rights Commission. She has recently been appointed as the new member of the United Nations Secretary General's High-Level Advisory Board on Mediation. And finally, Rahela Sediqi.
بالآخر Rahela Sediqi جغام من سر ده Rahela Sediqi تدا أغدي رئيس ده دي Rahela Trust پنامه په UK کې چې د افغانان بیرون اوسېږي د هغوی دپاره دا هغه دپاره جوړه شوې
and young women seeking education in Afghanistan. Committee for the Afghanistan mechanism.
یکی از عضو
Member of the Afghanistan Women's Network.
او به اصلاح خواستم شما تشکر میکنم.
First, I'd like to go to Fawzia Koofi in Doha to begin.
Are you referring to me, Sanatra?
Yes, Fawzia John.
Okay, because right now I'm in Kabul, but anyways, I'm in Kabul since 2 days. But in any case, thank you so much for arranging this panel and for the wonderful moderation. We all know that the talks started 6 months ago, a little bit more than 6 months ago in Doha. The first 3 months the two negotiation
دا دوه د مذاکراتو ټیم چې ول
که از 6 ماه میشه فقط به خاطر بود که ما به خاطر بودیم که همه چیزای تکنیکی را بحث میکردیم و تمام جوانبش ما در نظر گرفتیم درباره موافقه دوحه که به آمریکا شد. همین اصلاحاتی که به اصلاح موافق شد در ماه دسامبر اصلاحات شد و همه با هم.
Ceasefire. This is something that the people of Afghanistan demand. This is something that people, it makes the peace process relevant to the people's life. And from the other side of the negotiation, they presented 24 items for discussion. The first item from their side was an Islamic structure. After exchanging the agenda, we then went to consultation at the leadership level in Afghanistan, discussing with civil society, women groups, leadership of the government, High Council on Reconciliation, and with wider community to see what is their reaction and what they think we should actually put forward, discussing each item for discussion. After a wide range of consultation, the talks resumed in February. We were supposed to resume in January, but we all know that the Taliban were in Moscow and Iran and traveling around. So we then started, resumed the talk in February and discussed issues of substance. Our proposal once again was to negotiate on how we can agree on ceasefire, because since the talks began, there is a high level of violence, especially on the front of targeted killing. We know that a lot of prominent women rights activists, journalists, civil society activists were targeted. And based on a report that was published by the UN in Afghanistan, the UNAMA, UN Assistance Mission for Afghanistan, since the talks, since actually the agreement is signed between Taliban and the Americans, last February 2020, 400 women have been killed. So the level of high level of violence is certainly unacceptable by people of Afghanistan, and therefore our emphasis was on negotiating on how to agree on a ceasefire. The other side was emphasizing on other issues in the agenda. Finally, we managed to agree on 4 items in the agenda. And when the Istanbul process kind of started, discussions on how to conduct Istanbul, make it successful in a way that there is a link between Doha, Istanbul, and back to Doha, and be able to successfully agree on a political roadmap for a power sharing arrangement. In the midst of all of this, when President Biden announced the withdrawal of the troops, kind of I would say surprised all of us, because the tricky part was that unconditional withdrawal, because even if the withdrawal was based on the Doha agreement, we all know that the 4 elements of the Doha agreements are interlinked. One item is interlinked to the other one. So the delivery of the first item, for instance, will result into the delivery of the second items. And the agreeing on a political settlement by both sides through the intra-Afghan negotiation was something that will lead to a political settlement and eventually withdrawal of the foreign troops from Afghanistan starting from 1st May. However, the withdrawal actually was unconditioned and finishing in few months. This certainly made the situation more complex. And we know that after that, the Taliban were hesitant to attend Istanbul conference. Of course, both sides are now talking about negotiation. We haven't heard, being in Doha for 6 months, I'm in Kabul now for a few days, we haven't heard from Taliban that they're not going to, that they're not interested to pursue the talks in Doha, unlike that they say that they will not attend Istanbul. But the talks in Doha need to find the required momentum, speed, and relevance. And therefore, our proposal was for the UN to get a more active and significant role in terms of facilitation, along with other engaged countries on the ground, including Doha, which is Qatar, which is the host. I must say that the withdrawal without condition has not only put the talks in a complexity and made it difficult to carry on, but also the situation in Afghanistan. There is a lot of uncertainty. People are talking about worst case scenarios. I hope the worst case scenario will not happen, but we all remember from not very long years ago, from only 25 years ago, that a little bit more than that, that when the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan and Afghanistan was abandoned, unfortunately resulted to civil war with the emergence of Taliban. So those worst case scenarios are still in the people's mind. I hope it doesn't happen. Our hope is that in the next few months, we will once again agree politically on how to resolve our disputes and differences. I see the upcoming Istanbul conference as an only opportunity that will help us reach that goal. But once again, I must say that the situation is not as easy as we have assumed before the talks started.
Thank you so much, Fawzia, for that update and for that overview. Can I now ask Bilal Sarwary to give us his opening remarks? Bilal is also in Kabul. Bilal Sarwary?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine, yes.
As I said, the battlefield reality inside Afghanistan is that there's a very, a bloody fight going on everyday basis. The people of Afghanistan continue to pay a very heavy price. The last 12 days of the holy month of Ramadan, Afghanistan lost at least 120 members of its national security forces. At least 40 civilians were killed. So from indiscriminate mortar attacks to roadside bombs to airstrikes, Afghanistan is bleeding. I think it's also important to mention that the Taliban's military leaders and commanders think that they have a military victory. They call their soldiers the soldiers of victory. They speak about, in fact, a military victory. And a few nights ago, on the edge of the city of Ghazni, Afghan national security forces came under a large-scale attack. So major provincial capitals are still, facing the risks of falling into the hands of Taliban. And in the absence of the US withdrawing from Afghanistan at this critical stage, the lack of air power that they have been providing to the Afghan national security forces, I fear quite tragically that you will see a new chapter of violence, you will see more carnage and bloodshed. And as my friend Fawzia Koofi spoke about putting the ceasefire as the top on the agenda in Doha, we have to really remember that the meetings, the talks in Doha, both between the Americans and the Taliban, then between the Afghan government negotiating team and the Taliban, have not been able to put an end to the bloodshed and killings of Afghans on the ground. When you talk about these casualties and fatalities, you talk about coffins going back to remote parts of Badakhshan, Takhar, or in the east to Kunar and elsewhere. Each coffin basically falls literally like a thunder on a family. You have cases of entire families are being wiped out in all of these attacks. So I'm afraid that we will have a situation in the absence of a ceasefire and in the absence of a credible and durable peace process, new phases of conflict. And what I also saw, for example, on the battlefield in the south of the country is the sophisticated weapons, from night vision goggles to suicide, truck bombs being packed, driven against Afghan national security forces and checkpoints. If you take the example of Arghandab district, which just sits on the edge of the Kandahar city, the fighting, as you would remember, as we would all remember, started during the pomegranate season. So it was a massive economic blow to the farmers. Then the fighting continued. You almost had 30 bombs dropped by both the Afghan and American Air Force in one day. And you've had the Taliban literally infesting, the homes with roadside bombs, but also digging tunnels and filling them with explosives. So Arghandab today is not only destroyed, but it also resembles a ghost town. And by these examples of Arghandab or the fighting in Ghazni, or the heavy and intense fighting in Jalrez and Wardak, you can imagine that it's a different reality here on the ground. And we must distinguish something here, at least for our viewers' sake, that when you hear Western officials and American officials speak about this, this is very much for Western consumption. This is a different reality from what is happening on the ground. And needless to say, the targeted assassination of the most capable generation of Afghans, whether you speak about a judge, a prosecutor, a civil society activist, a journalist, is actually happening while the international community is present. So the failure to preserve the best and the most capable generation also brings back the fears of the 1990s, when the moderate and progressive Afghans were being assassinated on the streets of Peshawar, and the West looked the other way. So I'm afraid that is a very bleak picture that I'm giving you, but that is what it is. And beyond war, beyond the destruction that it's causing, there's also the issue of property prices, for example, plummeting, businesses leaving, businessmen, they don't have a hope in the future. And everyone is hoping, especially ordinary Afghans, that Afghanistan will not have its state collapse, especially the Afghan National Security Forces, because one has to remember that Afghanistan comes from a very, very painful past, a past that was not, too distant. So I would end with that. I hope I did justice to the topic, and I hope that's what you're looking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Bilal, for that update. And that's certainly a very valid and important perspective to have. And can I now go to Rahela Sediqi for her opening remarks?
Thank you, Sanajan. Thank you, Michael, Adrien, Ali, for such a good event. I think I will start with my experience of peace in my childhood. When I saw the King of Afghanistan came, and I was in grade 1, 50 years back, I saw that he was going with one black car, and a governor was accompanying him, and all the children was putting flower. And I was going to the kindergarten to collect my brother, who was younger than me, looking to the very remote area of Afghanistan, luxury of ties in Baghlan, and coming back to our situation of today's, that we demand peace. And as a diaspora, I would share my experience that diaspora is the almost 7 million population of Afghanistan around the world, and with all the intellectual background and demand and enthusiasm that they wanted to contribute to Afghanistan. If I can share my experience of how I was struggling to mobilize only 11 diaspora to contribute to go and attend to the Istanbul conference, it was so difficult. Even mobilization of fund for them to contribute was difficult. So what I'm trying to say that diaspora's contribution is vital to the process of socio-economic development of Afghanistan. With that, let me share my opinions of the diaspora organizations which I'm representing with several hats, and also the grassroots from Afghanistan, who we are in contact with them. I think peace is need. People of Afghanistan need peace, as Sarwary said and Fawzia. But what peace we want? Durable peace, the peace with just and fair for Afghan people. We do want to use this opportunity to bring peace in Afghanistan. And we do admire the United Nations engagement for the peace process in Afghanistan, because they are the voice of the world citizens. And we really demand their serious role to play in this regard, and to bring and mobilize the regional countries with their interest to really see, let Afghan people to own their peace process, to lead their peace process by themselves without the interference and disturbance of external people. They should be the owner of their peace building process, and United Nations should play a key role there. I would also say that I hope we are not losing our hope, we are not losing our heart, and we will and we should mobilize our effort and push to the process that international community, with international community support, this peace process make happen, and has, as Sarwary said, and Afghanistan people really released from this over 4 decades of war. I would also say that I think with withdrawal of this international force, I think the jihad in Afghanistan has no rationale and no logic. Instead, I think the Taliban should confront and sit with the government, sit with the people of Afghanistan, and see that the value of the concern of the Afghan citizens, that they do want the government and the Taliban to come and sit and talk and see, to be part of the government, or to establish the government, and to contribute. If they are serious Afghans, they have to see their contribution also for the further development of Afghanistan. And also, I would say that the other demand is, has everyone said, that none of this peace negotiation can be accepted by the citizen of Afghanistan, with all this suffering and killing and war in Afghanistan. So the complete ceasefire is the demand of the citizens as well. And also, I would say that when the withdrawal of the international force happened, I think the peacekeeping missions of the United Nations should be the observer and the supporter of the national security force in Afghanistan. And there has to be also conditions, and this is what I'm saying, is this is the grassroots voice and the people in Afghanistan, that there has to be also, for the prisoner release of the Taliban prisoner release, there has to be conditions. For example, if they say that 57,000 of the prisoners should be released, people say that there should also be conditions that with each 10 of Taliban released, there has to be at least 1 day ceasefire in Afghanistan, so that there is a chicken balance and the fair and justice as well. And also there has to be implementation mechanism for peace. Peace agreement in many countries have been failed, unfortunately, and have not been sustained. To sustain the peace agreement, it has to ensure and the guarantee for the citizens, with establishment of a mechanism of implementation and giving guarantees for the protections of the right of the citizen, Constitution of Afghanistan, republic government, because what tells me as a citizen of Afghanistan is that what legal framework can ensure and guarantee my protections. That is what is actually the demand of the citizen in Afghanistan. And when it comes to the sensitive situation, I must say that Afghan citizens will get united and will help to protect their territories. And Afghan national security, they have ability to protect their countries, but it's also international responsibilities. The withdrawal of the international force has to be with responsibility. today's progress of Afghanistan, today's achievement of Afghanistan's, with having several students, so like over 100,000 students, female students are at the universities. We have 4,000 female armies and 3,000 police, female police, and many champions of women who are playing role in development process of Afghanistan. What will happen to them, and how this guarantee, how that could be guaranteed. So this all needs this responsible withdrawal of the international security force and also implementation mechanism to help. And we also we are all also grateful to all international communities for their contribution to the process of development of Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahela John. Thank you for that comprehensive overview and aspiration for the future, in some sense. Can I go to Fawzia John? One of the questions that people have and people have been asking for so long is, what took you so long in Doha? Why couldn't you agree on something tangible before President Biden announced that withdrawal date without, the unconditional withdrawal date? Most Afghans point to the failure of the teams, and they're saying if you could have just reached on some sort of an agreement, then we wouldn't be in this scenario. Is that a fair assessment? And tell us what was the working like, and why you couldn't reach on an agreement, on some sort of an agreement?
Well, I do understand the anxiety and the interest by all of us who have lived in Afghanistan and continue to live under extremely difficult situation, losing our lives and losing the lives of our dear ones, and losing also being a victim of this war in a way or the other. We're all victim of this war. So I do understand the thirst for reaching a political agreement sooner. This is something we all want. I think after the agreement is signed between Taliban and the United States, the Taliban have a mentality of victory either way. The victory in the negotiation table, and if they did not gain what they want in the negotiation table, then victory in the battlefield. That was the major challenge, an obstacle for us to reach an agreement sooner. And also, I think logistically, such a complex and multidimensional peace process needs a facilitator or mediator in many countries who is expert on this. The peace process in Doha started without a facilitator. We had to struggle on basic things, including things like time for the meeting. And we were facing a group that is in a victorious mode. They believe that, if they do not get what they want in the negotiation table, they will get it through military interventions. Since they talks resumed in January, our proposal and emphasis to the other side was that let's get to the main business, e.g., let's start negotiation on the ceasefire from our side, and on the first agenda item from their side, which was establishment of an Islamic system. We wanted to know what is the definition of that Islamic system that they want to establish. What is the procedure for that? Are we going to, respect the core values and principles of the people of Afghanistan, that they have invested blood and treasure for that over the past few years and few decades, actually? They were not ready for that. My sense was that they were waiting for the assessment of the Biden administration to see what is their the conclusion of their assessment of the South Asia, but in general, but Afghanistan policy in particular. And
I think the line is poor for Fawzia Jan. Could I go to Bilal Sarwary? Bilal, what
I think I lost the connection.
Okay, we have you back. Carry on. We have you back.
Okay. No, I just wanted to conclude that they were waiting for the assessment of and the review of the policy, and after the review, we know that now the international community will withdraw in few months. So that is going to even make the situation much more difficult. I must say that we had equal impatience along with our nation in terms of getting to agree on a political settlement sooner. But we all know that it's a very complex war, over 4 decades of active war. I wish we were able to finalize everything in 6 months. That would have been an ideal situation, but we are facing with enormous challenges, things that all of us will not even predict before the talk starts. So the withdrawal now make it much more difficult, both in Qatar, but also in going forward in Istanbul.
It sounds like we are back at square one for some reason. No, but let's hear from Bilal. Bilal Jan, what might a political settlement between Kabul and the Taliban actually look like? What have you been hearing from people when you sit with ordinary Afghans? What would they like to see?
Well, just to let you know, Sima Jan is there as well.
Great, thank you.
I think it's incredibly important to mention that the political Kabul is extremely divided. I think the failure starts with the Afghan government, but it also goes to various political leaders and actors. One has to really remember that this, I again say that this is not a peace process. These are efforts to start a durable and credible peace process. For example, there's no victim representation. The representation of civil society, media is not really there. It's great to have people like Fawzia Koofi and Rahela Sediqi who are carrying the dreams of millions of Afghans on their shoulders. So I think for many, many people in Kabul, this peace process is nothing but a milking cow. I think the failure started there. Then you had a situation where the Americans actually got into negotiations with the Taliban, which was dubbed as a peace process, as peace negotiations. But in reality, it was an exit deal between the Americans and the Taliban with many secret, parts. I think the biggest leverage that the Afghan government had was the 5,000 prisoners that were released under immense pressure from the Americans. And what happened when those prisoners were released? People got killed at a district, at a village, at a provincial level. We have to really remember that the issue of grievances, the issue of revenge is massive. I was in the province of Kandahar, I was in Farah. Many Afghan officials, from counterterrorism officials to a police chief, came to me and told me that the Taliban leaders and commanders have a list that they have prepared, people that they want to go after. So I think these are the real fears. But if I can just give you the example of Jalrez, a strategic district in the province of Wardak, a few nights ago, at least 18 Afghan commandos were killed. Then you had an airstrike killing civilians. Then in another district, you had an indiscriminate mortar attack. I think the people of Afghanistan want an urgent respite, an urgent end to the bloodshed. Again, if the Americans, the international community, and all the stakeholders cannot make sure that Afghanistan has a ceasefire, in the absence of a ceasefire, you will simply have, bloodshed and killings. And as Fawzia Koofi earlier mentioned some figures from the United Nations report, I mean, the figures are only going up. The casualties and fatalities are increasing. Afghan women are extremely vulnerable in the provinces and the villages. You have videos of, lashing appearing. You have stonings. I mean, nothing has changed there. And the Taliban, in fact, I would say, are the only party that has got so many concessions, one after the other. And if you're the Taliban at the moment, when you know that the biggest supporter of the Afghan government is pulling out, when they will have no air support, why should you negotiate? So I think this should also start from Kabul. You know, the Afghan government, the Afghan politicians, they should put the house in order. It's time for, you know, leadership. It's time for trying to get everyone under one table. One very clear example that has confused so many Afghans is that the palace says one thing. Dr. Abdullah, who's the, you know, head of a body, you know, says something, for example, totally different. And needless to say that with everything that has been happening in Doha, the Afghan people has very little knowledge about it. So the lack of transparency about the fate of an entire nation is also something that, you know, has to be brought in. And the war of words between the Taliban and the Afghan government, the insults that they have been throwing at each other also shows you that there's the climate of mistrust, you know. One thing that I do want to bring in and overemphasize this issue again, that just because we don't hear about the news on CNN and other international media outlets, it does not mean that the bloodshed is not going on. The fighting has moved into Afghan villages and districts. You know, Afghan countryside is now basically infested with, you know, massive amounts of explosives. So when I was in Lashkargah, for example, it's evening, it's morning, or it's afternoon, you know, the guns shots just, they don't stop. The artillery, you know, the roadside bombs. And the people of Afghanistan, especially the younger generation, the children, you know, they are being traumatized. So this is what both sides, the Afghan government as well as the Taliban, they need to put the suffering of the Afghan people ahead of everything else. What we are seeing right now is, as I said, a deep climate of mistrust, and also the failure here in Kabul to gather everyone, all the different stakeholders. One thing that is quite disappointing as an Afghan to notice that with all these targeted assassinations, you know, no one does anything about it from the Afghan government. Yes, there are statements, yes, there are condemnations, but Afghans are simply sick and tired of all sides simply issuing few statements or tweets, you know. So I think this is the big problem. The big problem is that, you know, the Afghan people are in fact actually missing from this very, very important, you know, process. And hopefully this peace process will go ahead. It may take longer. I hope that Doha does not shut, because if there's that, then I think I will lose my hope, you know, for Afghanistan and for its future.
Thank you, Bilal. It sounds like a very desperate situation. Speaking of suffering, one person who has been documenting it for a very long time, documenting abuse, violations, and the suffering of ordinary people is Dr. Sima Samar, who I'm glad to say is joining us now. Dr. Samar, you have spent much of your life, as I said, advocating for human rights. Give us your insights and give us your overview of where things stand at the moment. Dr. Asab, can you hear me?
Microphone.
Yes. Salam to everyone, and good morning, good afternoon if the people, I don't know where people live, but good evening also to people who are in Kabul. I'm sorry that I was a little late. There was a misunderstanding. I'm not going to spend time on that. But just to say a few things why everything is not going in the right direction. I think number one, the American really gave the Taliban much more acknowledgement and recognition that they deserve. That is one of the problem. The second problem, I think that they really undermine the involvement of Afghan government. We like it or not, this is a government, if it's 1 million participated on the election or 500,000 or 200,000, but it is a recognized government. And that was, as we all see the 4-page document, they said other side. The third point that I think was at the beginning also, it is unfortunately the weakness of the Afghan government, that they were not able to unite the people, and the lack of unification within the peace process is a big, big missed opportunity, I would say, and it's a big loss. And the fourth point that I would like to mention was that it was not inclusive. I mean, how much we really fought for inclusion of victims, inclusion of minorities, inclusion of civil society. We count the journalists and civil society. Of course, they are the strongest part of civil society. So that was the mistake from the beginning. And I think, again, it was also, unfortunately, in the agreement, it was not a strong condition on the Taliban for the ceasefire. I think if I was, instead of Khalilzad as an Afghan, if he acted as an Afghan, he should have put ceasefire at the top of the agenda rather than the other issues, although the others are also important. But ceasefire is something that we could stop the bleeding. And as long as the bleeding and suffering goes ahead, we will create more environment and divide more the society and create more pain and wounds in the society to bleed. And that is really very unfortunate. So I think, yes, what I did, and I want to say also that peace is a basic human right. To live in peace is a basic human right for me. Beside that, how much we suffered. It's 43 years of bleeding in the country, 43 years of killing, 43 years of commission of war crimes and crimes against humanity, 40 years of pushing the country back to another century, I would say. Because at least as Rahela said, I spent my childhood in Helmand, and I gone to co-education school in Helmand, where there was, I think we were calling it small American or tiny American. Unfortunately, everything gone back. So I think a few issues. One, yes, I spent a lot of my time that we documented all these suffering, because I do believe that we have to acknowledge, otherwise this wound is not going to heal. It continues to bleed, and the people will try to take revenge. And that is not going to end up with the peace process. That is what we need to know. I mean, this is the right of the people. Right to justice is also a basic human right. It's not luxury. It's a need of human being to have access to justice, to have access to acknowledgement. What we did actually on the national consultation in 2003 and 2004, mainly 2003, that the people came up with good recommendation. One was the first recommendation was to acknowledge on the suffering of the people, to acknowledge the suffering that the people gone through. That is something. The second recommendation of the people was a symbolic act or promotion of cultural Islamic values to promote forgiveness. And that would come, of course, when the people acknowledge that they committed a crime, then the people can forgive them for the crime they committed. The third was the documentation of the crimes committed in the country for the history, as a history, and also as a lesson learned by the future generation. And we need to stop the repetition of the crimes committed in the country. Unfortunately, it continues. Fourth was the vetting of the state institution from the people who are accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity. We really fought hard during the constitution, Lawyer Jirga, to add this in the constitution, because in the constitution it says that the people who are convicted by court, in an independent court, we never had an independent court as long as I remember, at least. So it is very difficult to say that who's committed war crimes and who's not. So that was something that missed during the drafting of the constitution, or approval of the constitution in Louis Jirga in 2004. Fifth was the, of course, the kind of a prosecutor office of Muslim judges and Afghan judges who could do some kind of investigation on war crimes and crimes against humanity. As long as the culture of impunity continues, we cannot stop the war. Yes, it's good to have ceasefire, but ceasefire, we have to remember that ceasefire is good, is basic step for a peace building in the country, to stop the bleeding, to stop the killing, to stop making more the wound deeper within the society. But that is not peace. So we need to work together for a sustainable and durable peace in Afghanistan. That is require inclusivity, united approach by the people who are in the Democratic Front or Republic Front, and also inclusivity and acknowledgement of the people. So that is, I think that is really something that we need to see. And everybody who committed war crimes and crimes against humanity, I'm not saying that they should be put in jail or they should be executed, but they at least should acknowledge the suffering of the people and ask for forgiveness from the victims of war in 43 years in Afghanistan. I stop here and thank you. I'm sorry again that I was late, but it is iftar time here.
Thank you, Dr. Asad. Thank you for that overview and for that comprehensive analysis of where things stand. You mentioned some of the shortcomings in the beginning, and I'd like to ask Rahela Sediqi now, what could the diaspora communities do to make sure that kind of, so to speak, flawed processes are not going ahead? What can they do to make sure that whatever process there is on the future of Afghanistan, they have a meaningful contribution and they participate as assertive, capable bodies?
Thank you, Sanajan. I think that first of all, I would suggest that the diaspora themselves, the intellectual community, proactively come and knock the door of all those allies, international allies, and the country of the host that they are living, to see their contribution as a citizen of Afghanistan, as a people that their origin countries are in Afghanistan, and to value their contribution as well, and themselves to get more mobilized. Also, I would say in a very organized and strategic way to come together and to contribute. Their host countries also needs to see their values and also their contribution, because Afghans, as far as I have been engaged with so many of our diaspora community organizations in different countries, they enthusiastically wanted to contribute. They want to be engaged, but what we need to do is to get together and be more organized, and to see where are our contribution are valid. Because there are so many intellectual diasporas around the world, Afghan diasporas around the world, that see Vietnam, see Ukraine, Korea, and Thailand. It was actually the diaspora contributions for the development process of their country through post-conflict and during the peace process as well. Diaspora can do a lot of advocacy for for Afghanistan peace process. They can play the role and also to contribute through different conferences, through different dialogue, through different engagement. I mean, getting together through different program and process to contribute. Write articles, do dig the well and research and provide papers as well. So there are so many ways that the diaspora can contribute. And also, I mean, Sanajan, you know, all of us, and Ali, Dr. Adrien knows, that diaspora in terms of provision, contribution to the economic development of Afghanistan had played a major role as well. And they could play a role in terms of their intellectual background and professional background also. What is also needed, I would say that, number one, the international community, the host countries, to support the diaspora's engagement in a meaningful way, because sometimes they struggle. The second suggestion I would say is our Afghans inside Afghanistan, that I would say 1,000 times I would value the contribution of people like Sarwary, like many thousands and millions of other Afghans, and there has to be like mutual respect and value the contribution of each other, because it is Afghanistan at the end of the day, and it is mutual responsibility that we have to come together and work together and help to bring the country out of these situations. That is what I would suggest.
Thank you. I just want to mention that it is iftar time in Kabul, and our panelists have been fasting, so they're obviously having their dinner, and that's probably why you may not be able to see their videos at times. They will try and accommodate us, and we're sorry about that. Fawzia John and Dr. Saib and Bilal. We are now getting so many questions from our audiences and people who have joined us from different parts of the world and Europe. One of the question is for Fawzia John, which is, what is the likelihood that there will be a political settlement before the US leaves Afghanistan in September?
Thank you, Sana John, and thanks for the question. Before getting to the question, I would like to say that on the inclusion and inclusivity, there is always room for making sure that every walks of life is represented in a process. And this is something we need to advocate for. This is something we need to make sure for sustainability of a process. But the fact that the Taliban have not been sincere on the negotiation is not because the Republic team has not been able to accommodate representatives of media or other walks of life. The fact that they have not been, the process have been flawed, as you mentioned, has other elements, had other reasons to it. One of that is when the Americans started negotiating with Taliban, they did not include anybody from the state or from the government. I'm not part of the government, but this is a sitting government and they need to be included in the negotiation. So instead of bilateral negotiation, there was a need for a trilogue, for including the government of Afghanistan. We all know that we were actually obliged to do things that we were not a signatory to it, e.g. the release of 5,000 prisoners. Afghan government was not a signatory to that, but as a good faith, demonstrating trust and good faith in this process, 5,000 prisoners were released. Some of them, we know that they went back to the battlefield, and some of them, in fact, unfortunately, has been killed. So, yes, the Taliban has been given a world stage, an Afghan government as a partner to the world, recognized government, has not been given the same stage as the Taliban have been. So that put Taliban in a win-win situation. Winning in the battlefield is for their interest, and winning in the negotiation table. So they will take both equally, and more emphasis on speeding up the battlefield to gain more territories in order to gain more in the negotiation table as well. This has been the mood in Doha. So the fact that we do not have representatives of some community, which we should actually, does not mean that that does not actually, is not a reason for Taliban not taking this process serious. Now on the likelihood, we all talked about
possible negative scenario, I do not want to repeat that, because in the meantime, we have a moral responsibility to keep our spirit alive and to keep a positive vibe in this country. We have gone through extremely difficult situations in the past. We have survived. I'm sure we will survive this situation as well. But in the meantime, there are valid concerns. We all have concerns. Women, above all, have more concerns than others, because women have been used as tools of war, not even a collateral damage of war in the past few years. They have been used as an instrument to demonstrate progress, but at the end of the day, they have been betrayed with. So there are all the valid reasons to have concerns. But in the meantime, I think in a positive scenario, if Istanbul goes well, we need some pressure. The United States need to use its leverage of the Doha Agreement of condition-based withdrawal, or interlinking the elements of the Doha Agreement to each other, use that leverage. The neighboring countries, they all said in Moscow in a Troika statement that they do not support the return of Islamic Emirates, so they have to really demonstrate what they mean. They need to support the democratization process through this peace process. So a democratic Afghanistan, as a result of this peace process, we want some more pressure from the region, from the international community on Taliban to make them accountable on the negotiation table. If that all happens and we go and the Istanbul happens with a good fate, there are chances still that could be used for political settlement. But in the meantime, I must say, and we all know that that the security, that both sides are preparing for a more deteriorating security situation. That means escalating violence, and as a result, more bloodshed. That has been something we try to avoid over 3-4 years engaging in the negotiation. We have tried, as women also, we have tried to take our future and destiny, the control of our future, so that we are not called anymore a tokenistic kind of participation. But the situation is complex. We all know it's complex. We all know that different countries have their own interests in Afghanistan. We all know that they are trying to reshape their politics post-withdrawal. So considering everything that is happening, once again, Istanbul is an opportunity that we have to use. Yes, we internally need to bring more consensus. We internally need to mobilize all the forces that have been vocal voices over the past 20 years in protecting and preserving the common principles of democracy. We have to mobilize them. It doesn't have to be a government position as a bribe to mobilize people, but around common values. And then go to Istanbul from a position of power, mobilize more international community to pressurize the other side. Because if a return of Islamic Emirates is not an option for the region, then they have one choice. The choice is to support this process, which is the result of which a democratic settlement.
Thank you. And many of our questions are about those issues as well, about women's rights, about minority rights, about migration, about deportation of Afghans from Europe and the rest of the world. One of the main questions is, we all worry about the erosion of freedoms. And Dr. Samar, in a post-withdrawal Afghanistan, there is always a danger of the erosion of freedoms, as we talked about it. What can be done to make sure all participants in any future Afghan government are committed to the sort of institutions and processes that would uphold human rights?
I think the holding human rights as a condition in the peace process is must. If we don't have human rights protected, then that will not be peace. I mean, that would be a political deal, a short-term political deal that we have done it in the past history of Afghanistan. So we should not repeat that. And we should also learn from the past history of the country, when the peace process were exclusive, not inclusive, then it did not last. I mean, that's why it's 43 years of war. Different people came to power and gone, but the suffering of the people continued. So I think the human rights, including women's rights, should be at the top important condition on the peace process. And for that, in order to preserve that, I think it should be, as previously Rahela John said, it should be a mechanism to observe and monitor the peace implementation of the agreement. First of all, it should be in the agreement. And secondly, the implementation of agreement is really key. And that would, of course, shows their commitment to human rights. I think the problem is that the Taliban keeps saying that they would give the rights to women and the human rights according to Islam and the Sharia, but their own interpretation of Sharia. We don't know the exact interpretation, and they don't give us example. Which country, for example, which country's government or which state is an example of Taliban regime that they want Islamic State in the country. So that is something that we have to be careful. And I think that some of the people, unfortunately, some of the Western countries or people from the West keep saying that the human rights is Western value, but I would argue that it is not Western value. It is a human value. Wherever there's a human, there's a human rights with it. The fact is our existence is a reality and rights. So nobody can ignore that. And we should push for that. I think we all have to stand for that. Otherwise, we will be loser, and the bloodshed and the killing will continue in the country.
And Rahela John, for one of the questions is about the refugees and Afghan migrants in Europe and the fact that they're leaving. We heard from Fawzia John that the situation is going to get worse. We heard from Bilal, who already feels that it's very grim on the ground. People are being targeted. There are lists, and it's getting worse by the day. Businesses are leaving. And Western countries, mainly EU countries, they know what's happening, yet countries like Austria are deporting Afghans back to Afghanistan. What can the diaspora do to, in a way, to make sure that they have a dialogue with these governments in the West to say, hang on a minute, you agree that the situation is volatile and it's getting worse by the day, that these Afghans should not be deported to locations that are not safe. What can the diaspora communities do to demand that?
I think again, Sanajan, first of all, the organization who are responsible for refugees, like refugee councils and the diaspora community, they should come together and have an advocacy with their host countries as well. At least those who have a citizenship or have passports, rather than those who are refugees, because refugees, you know that refugees, they have difficulties of coming front and talk about it. But to those who have citizenships, that they can advocate for the case. But like one of the refugees from Iraq, there was a lady, she said that when I was deported, when I was said that you're supposed to be, my case was not accepted, I said, what is this? The war in Iraq is, how do you see the war in Iraq? So how do we see the war in Afghanistan? And from one hand, it is so difficult and painful for the country that there will be a lot of brain drain from the country if this bloodshed continued. And it is actually the right of the people that where they can feel, they see the seal safe on their head to live there, and that is the freedom, and that's the human rights. But when it comes to the countries of their host, and when they land in the countries, we have to really advocate more strongly about some criteria that countries like Afghanistan, countries like Syria, countries like Iraq, they are not the countries that people should be deported from these countries. Or or they have to come together to really build meaningful peace, as Sima and everyone said, meaningful peace in Afghanistan, then, so that the people can stay, and even refugees in countries, they have, as I said earlier, they have a lot of enthusiasm to go back and help the countries. But if there is no security, there will be a lot of more brain drain. So more mobilizations. I would say embassies of Afghanistan in different countries. I suggest that they should also be more proactively mobilizing the diaspora in the country, engaging and talk about the hot issues, that this is the problems, and how do you want to see, how do you want to contribute, and also the diaspora themselves with the refugees organizations. There has to be more interactions, highlighting the issue, explicitly highlighting the issues, that what are the actual evidences that the refugees or the asylum seekers faced through the process of their applications, and what happened to those who went back to the country and deported to the country, like the guy, the young boy who was executing himself. There could be many other examples that we don't know what happened to them. So more advocacy, more mobilizations, and double responsibilities of the refugees councils of the countries. Luckily, Adrien is here, and many other refugee councils. We have to proactively approach, and they have to proactively see how, because the case of Syria was different. There was so much acceptance of the Syrian when there was war in Syria, and in the case of Afghanistan is a bit different. So why not Afghans' refugee case was not accepted? Why their application were not? There's the same situation of war in this country and that country. So what are the issues behind? So more investigation, more case studies, more evidences, more mobilizations, more interactions between these different actors.
Thank you. And Bilal, one of the questions that we keep hearing from all sides, well, mainly the Taliban, they're saying that they're the representatives of this many population, or that much of the country is under their control. And we also have claims on the Republic side, and obviously the Republic is an elected government. When it comes to support for the Taliban amongst ordinary local populations, what did you see from your travels to different parts of the country? What is the feeling on the ground? Or I suppose, what do those people want? Do they want the Taliban, or do they want something else? Your mic is mute. Your mic is mute.
Is it fine now?
It's fine now, yes.
Wherever I've gone, from cities like Kabul to villages to districts, everyone is in favor of a permanent and comprehensive ceasefire. What we have to really remember, that what everyone in Afghanistan has in common is the amount of people that are being killed. So that is one thing that we have seen even with the grassroots peace movement. We saw that in Helmand. It was very interesting that I met a farmer who had lost like 3 of his kids while he was working in his field. An indiscriminate motor came in and hit basically his house. So he was saying that enough is enough, and all he wants is a comprehensive and permanent ceasefire. So it's very, very important that we have to remember that everyone is suffering, and the Afghan people have said enough is enough. If you go to the morgue here at the military hospital, or if you go to any province or any city, the only business that's actually thriving is coffin making. So let's hope that that wish is honored, and let's also hope that all sides put the suffering of the Afghan people on the negotiating table. I think I would like to be slightly more critical of Doha and what has happened. While they're very good people who are representing, our hopes and aspirations, it's also true that some seats were literally given as trophies, as tokens. And I would again say that, the Afghanization of this peace process is still missing. Uh, if you have like 50 people representing Afghanistan, why not? Who has put this number? Who has put this figure? So everyone has to be there at the negotiating table so that people can actually also hear from the victims. We haven't really heard from the victims. And I also come from a province in the eastern part of Afghanistan, a province that provides soldiers for Afghan national security forces. And one single day, there were 11 coffins which went into 3 districts, and 7 of those were newly married, soldiers. I can say the same for the Taliban. So if you don't have a ceasefire, if you don't have an end to the bloodshed, and you have these talks that continue and takes longer, I think Afghanistan, unfortunately, will have another generation of, widows and orphans. And this war is only crippling Afghanistan by the day. I mean, when I travel on the highway between Kandahar and Herat, you see these huge craters being created by roadside bombs. Afghanistan's paved roads and infrastructures is gone. So there's a cost, if Afghanistan doesn't have let's say, a ceasefire for another year or two, then Afghanistan will lose everything from its people to its infrastructure to its businessmen who will not be willing to stay here. And only, I think it was in the last 24 hours, if I'm right, there were 6 targeted assassinations here in Kabul. So the fact that assassins are going around the streets at the moment in Kabul and killing government officials and others only tells you that there are grave and great dangers lying ahead. I was equally disappointed by a message from the UK embassy, which was quite alarming, saying that every British citizen must leave Afghanistan by commercial means as soon as possible. While they could have passed that message privately through other mode of communications, it also shows you that even Western countries with embassies who are here, they have very little faith in Afghanistan and in the peace process. And it creates a climate of, mistrust, it creates panic. I would also like to say this, perhaps people who are my friends in the government and some politicians will not be happy, that what we have to see is less egos, less emotions. You continue to see a wave of emotions by all sides, I mean, there has to be a constructive debate, there has to be a policy of reaching out to everyone. Afghanistan today needs a united, strong front for peace. There are the expertise of so many people that the government and everyone else who's been involved here in Kabul with the peace process, they could have done that. And unfortunately, that is missing. Unfortunately, you don't hear about the everyday human cost that this war is inflicting on Afghans. You don't hear it in the international media, but you also don't hear it in terms of its human coverage in the Afghan media, although my colleagues in the Afghan media are taking massive risks, to tell the story. So these are all, the things that Afghan people are telling me, and one should never forget the issue of high unemployment, the issue of streets of Kabul. Every morning, they are full with people waiting, to basically get a day job, which they can't. So Afghanistan has a lot of problems, a lot of challenges on its hands. And let's hope, let's hope that there is that peace process, and let's hope that the international community does not abandon Afghanistan completely like they did in the 1990s. And let's also hope that the regional dynamics are also brought into the table, because Afghanistan lives in a region where things are extremely complicated. Some regional countries are not so innocent. So if that doesn't also happen, I also have my fears that we will not have a durable and long-term peace process.
It seems like, from what I'm hearing, is that you have a fear that the international community might abandon Afghanistan, and the regional countries have not learned to listen. But many Afghans are saying that if you look at it, if Afghanistan fails, then the refugee influx will go to Pakistan, will go to Iran. The drug economy will flourish to Russia, Central Asian countries, and eventually to Europe and even the US. So the entire world is going to be affected by this. It's not that just Afghans are suffering. Yes, at the moment it sounds like the Afghans are suffering, but if this fails, this process, then everybody is going to feel it. What are you hearing from your interactions with the international community who are based in Afghanistan? Surely you meet them, you ask them questions. What is the feeling? What's the sense with them?
I found the Europeans who are extremely concerned about what is happening, because they have genuine fears of things going back to the old days. So this time you will have the issue of refugees, the drug issue, but also, the foreign fighters who have been here. Some people tell you there are around 3,000. They have got intermarriages. Then in the 1990s, you didn't have Telegram, you didn't have WhatsApp, you didn't have social media. Today, those militants are not only communicating via those modes, but also recruiting. So there is that. There's no doubt that there's that. But I think it is incredibly important to point out why I think that the international community may abandon Afghanistan. Look at the announcements, look at everyone is saying, we are leaving together. No one is saying stay here forever. At least they should have committed to a comprehensive peace process. At least they should have used their leverage while they were here, and they have made sure that Afghanistan was on a path to less violence at least. Imagine what would have happened if the United States had stayed here in the 1990s, if they had invested to revive the rural economy, especially, the lands that were destroyed during the war. Look at the cost, what happened, right? So this relationship that Afghans have had with the Americans and Europeans and others, it's also 20 years old. A lot of people have risked a lot of things to work with them, from a judge to a police officer to anyone. So now that the issue of revenge and the issue of grievances, and you hear these things very publicly. I'm not saying this, the language that Taliban are using, we have defeated the invaders, we are going to go after the puppets, we're going to do that, we're going to do that. There are massive risks of, people walking into villages and homes and taking things into their own hands. So I hope that at least now that they have announced that their military is leaving, which I believe one of the biggest leverage is lost, I hope that now they will use other means. For example, they will use, travel restrictions for Taliban leaders and commanders, They will use the issue of legitimacy, but they will more importantly use, all the powers that they have to make sure that Afghans don't go back to that 1990s, when there's street fighting, where there are many different governments. And I've covered Afghanistan over the last 20 years. I started as a translator. From my very own experience, it is very clear that no side can have a military victory. The only thing that will destroy Afghanistan further. And today, the way I look at it is, the amount of Afghan children who are simply not able to go to school, not in secure areas, but even in Kabul the other day, I saw this, that there are no school teachers. So I think Afghans at the moment are extremely uncertain about their future, and they're very fearful about their past.
Thank you for that, Bilal. And there are so many questions that unfortunately we haven't got the time for to ask the panelists. With that, we've only got 3 minutes, and I'm going to say thank you to all of our panelists, Fawzia Koofi, Bilal Sarwary, Dr. Sima, Samar, and Rahela Sediqi, and to each and every one of you for joining us here today. We hope this event has increased your understanding of the ongoing situation in Afghanistan, the continued efforts to bring some sense of stability to the country, the fears and aspirations of the ordinary Afghans, be they in Afghanistan or across the world. And once again, thank you all for joining us. I now hand over to Adrien Bory from DRC, who will say some closing remarks. Adrien is a project coordinator with the Danish Refugee Council, or the Refugee Council's Diaspora program. He leads the initiative called Afghan Diaspora Engagement in Europe. Thank you. Adrien, over to you.
Thank you so much, Safi, for moderating such an engaging and important discussion. Thank you as well to our fantastic panelists, to Fawzia Koofi, Bilal Sarwary, Dr. Sima Samar, and Rahela Sediqi, for sharing your insight on this very complex peace process. Thank you to our two interpreters, Mahaz Rabi and Mohammed Amin. Allow me also to thank our partners from VIDC, Dr. Ali Ahmad and Mikhail Fanizadeh, for co-organizing the event. This is the second event initiative after last year's event on COVID-19 in Afghanistan. It's really a pleasure to collaborate. Thank you to Lisa and Irene for the Zoom support and the social media. And by the way, I would also like to remind you to fill out the survey. There's a link in the chat that will be very valuable for us to work on the event. Thank you to my colleague, Obadullah Abdul Haq. Thank you to our donors, the Australian Development Agency and its German counterparts, GIZ. This event is part of a series of events in our project, Afghan Diaspora Engagement in Europe. And the next event will come soon, and the focus will be on the Afghan asylum lottery in Europe. This will involve, within these events that will be co-organized with ECRE, the European Council on Refugees and Exiles, we will include a discussion on deportation, which we touched upon briefly during this meeting. And I will second the idea that the situation in Afghanistan is so uncertain now that it is a really strong argument for fighting deportation from Europe. We also have an event on integration in Europe and how to strengthen the Afghan diaspora advocacy from Europe. So a lot of points that we touched upon during the meeting today. We will also later this year support some discussion with the Afghan diaspora in Europe on the national diaspora engagement policy. And towards the end of the year, we'll have a 3-day conference, which we hope for the diaspora in Europe, which we hope we'll be able to have in person to discuss hopefully some of the developments. Finally, I just want to mention that we'll write a report about the event, and that will be shared on the VIDC website and DSC website and our respective Facebook pages. We look very much forward to seeing you to future events. Thank you very much for your active participation on behalf of VIDC and DSC.